La Gorda was startled. She squatted and pulled me down with her by the shawl tied around my waist. She put her hands under her skirt for a moment and then stood up. Her hands were clasped, and when she snapped her fingers open, a volley of sparks flew from them. "Piss in your hands," La Gorda whispered through clenched teeth. "Huh?" I said, unable to comprehend what she wanted me to do. She whispered her order 3 or 4 times with increasing urgency. She must have realized I did not know what she wanted, for she squatted again and showed that she was urinating in her hands. I stared at her dumbfounded as she made her urine fly like reddish sparks. My mind went blank. I did not know which was more absorbing, the sight La Gorda was creating with her urine, or the wheezing of the approaching entity. I could not decide on which of the two stimuli to focus my attention. Both were enthralling. "Quickly, do it in your hands," La Gorda grumbled between her teeth. I heard her, but my attention was dislocated. With an imploring voice, La Gorda added that my sparks would make the approaching creature, whatever it was, retreat. She began to whine, and I began to feel desperate. I could not only hear, but I could sense with my whole body the approaching entity. I tried to urinate in my hands. My effort was useless. I was too self-conscious and nervous. I became possessed by La Gorda's agitation and struggled desperately to urinate. I finally did it. I snapped my fingers 3 or 4 times, but nothing flew out of them. "Do it again," La Gorda said. "It takes a while to make sparks." I told her that I had used up all the urine I had. There was the most intense look of despair in her eyes. At that instant, I saw the massive rectangular shape moving toward us. Somehow it did not seem menacing to me, although La Gorda was about to faint out of fear. Suddenly, she untied her shawl and leaped onto a small rock that was behind me and hugged me from behind, putting her chin on my head. She had practically climbed on my shoulders. The instant that we adopted that position, the shape ceased moving. It kept on wheezing, perhaps 20 feet away from us. I felt a giant tension that seemed to be focused in my midsection. After a while, I knew without the shadow of a doubt that if we remained in that position, we would have drained our energy and fallen prey to whatever was stalking us. I told her that we were going to run for our lives. She shook her head negatively. She seemed to have regained her strength and confidence. She said then that we had to bury our heads in our arms and lie down with our thighs against our stomachs. I remembered then that years before, Don Juan had made me do the same thing one night when I was caught in a deserted field in northern Mexico by something equally unknown and yet equally real to my senses. At that time, Don Juan had said that fleeing was useless, and the only thing one could do was to remain on the spot in the position La Gorda had just prescribed. I was about to kneel down when I had the unexpected feeling that we had made a terrible mistake in leaving the cave. We had to go back to it at any cost. I looped La Gorda's shawl over my shoulders and under my arms. I asked her to hold the tips of my head, climb to my shoulders, and stand on them, bracing herself by pulling up the ends of the shawl and fastening it like a harness. Years before, Don Juan had told me that one should meet strange events, such as the rectangular shape in front of us, with unexpected actions. He said that once he himself stumbled upon a deer that talked to him, and he stood on his head for the duration of that event, as a means of assuring his survival and to ease the strain of such an encounter. My idea was to try to walk around the rectangular shape back to the cave, with La Gorda standing on my shoulders. She whispered that the cave was out of the question. The Nahual had told her not to remain there at all. I argued, as I fixed the shawl for her, that my body had the certainty that in the cave we would be all right. She replied that that was true and it would work, except that we had no means whatever to control those forces. We needed a special container, a gourd of some sort, like those I had seen dangling from Don Juan's and Don Gennaro's belts. She took off her shoes and climbed on my shoulders and stood there. I held her by her calves. As she pulled on the ends of the shawl, I felt the tension of the band under my armpits. I waited until she had gained her balance. To walk in the darkness carrying 115 pounds on my shoulders was no mean feat. I went very slowly. I counted 23 paces, and I had to put her down. The pain on my shoulder blades was unbearable. I told her that although she was very slender, her weight was crushing my collarbone. The interesting part, however, was that the rectangular shape was no longer in sight. Our strategy had worked. La Gorda suggested that she carry me on her shoulders for a stretch. I found the idea ludicrous. My weight was more than what her small frame could stand. We decided to walk for a while and see what happened. There was a dead silence around us. We walked slowly, bracing each other. We had moved no more than a few yards when I again began to hear strange breathing noises, a soft, prolonged hissing, like the hissing of a feline. I hurriedly helped her to get back on my shoulders and walk another 10 paces. I knew we had to maintain the unexpected as a tactic if we wanted to get out of that place. I was trying to figure out another set of unexpected actions we could use instead of La Gorda standing on my shoulders when she took off her long dress. In one single movement, she was naked. She scrambled on the ground looking for something. I heard a cracking sound, and she stood up holding a branch from a low bush. She maneuvered her shawl around my shoulders and neck and made a sort of riding support where she could sit with her legs wrapped around my waist, like a child riding piggyback. She then put the branch inside her dress and held it above her head. She began to twirl the branch, giving the dress a strange bounce. To that effect, she added a whistle, imitating the peculiar cry of a night owl. After a few hundred yards or so, I heard the same sounds coming from behind us and from the sides. She changed to another bird call, a piercing sound similar to that made by a peacock. A few minutes later, the same bird calls were echoing all around us. I had witnessed a similar phenomenon of bird calls being answered years before with Don Juan. I had thought at the time that perhaps the sounds were being produced by Don Juan, who was hiding nearby in the darkness, or even by someone closely associated with him, such as Don Gennaro, who was aiding him in creating an insurmountable fear in me, a fear that made me run in total darkness without even stumbling. Don Juan had called that peculiar action of running in the darkness the gate of power. I asked La Gorda if she knew how to do the gate of power. She said yes. I told her that we were going to try it, even though I was not at all sure I could do it. She said that it was neither the time nor the place for that, and pointed in front of us. My heart, which had been beating fast all along, began to pound wildly inside my chest. Right ahead of us, perhaps 10 feet away, and smack in the middle of the trail, was one of Don Gennaro's allies, the strange glowing man with the long face and the bald head. I froze on the spot. I heard La Gorda's shriek as though it were coming from far away. She frantically pounded on my sides with her fists. Her action broke my fixation on the man. She turned my head to the left and then to the right. On my left side, almost touching my leg, was the black mass of a giant feline with glaring yellow eyes. To my right, I saw an enormous phosphorescent coyote. Behind us, almost touching La Gorda's back, was the dark rectangular shape. The man turned his back to us and began to move on the trail. I also began to walk. La Gorda kept on shrieking and whining. The rectangular shape was almost grabbing her back. I heard it moving with crushing thumps. The sounds of its steps reverberated on the hills around us. I could feel its cold breath on my neck. I knew that La Gorda was about to go mad, and so was I. The feline and the coyote were almost rubbing my legs. I could hear their hissing and growling increasing in volume. I had, at that moment, the irrational urge to make a certain sound Don Juan had taught me. The allies answered me. I kept on frantically making the sound, and they answered me back. The tension diminished by degrees, and before we reached the road, I was part of a most extravagant scene. La Gorda was riding piggyback, happily bouncing her dress over her head as if nothing had ever happened, keeping the bounces in rhythm with the sound I was making, while 4 creatures of another world answered me back as they moved at my pace, flanking us on all 4 sides. We got to the road in that fashion. but I did not want to leave. There seemed to be something missing. I stayed motionless with La Gorda on my back and made a very special tapping sound Don Juan had taught me. He had said that it was the call of moths. In order to produce it, one had to use the inside edge of the left hand and the lips. As soon as I made it, everything seemed to come to rest peacefully. The four entities answered me, and as they did, I knew which were the ones that would go with me. I then walked to the car and eased La Gorda off my back onto the driver's seat and pushed her over to her side. We drove away in absolute silence. Something had touched me somewhere, and my thoughts had been turned off. La Gorda suggested that we go to Don Gennaro's place instead of driving to her house. She said that Benigno, Nestor, and Pablito lived there, but they were out of town. Her suggestion appealed to me. Once we were in the house, La Gorda lit a lantern. The place looked just as it had the last time I had visited Don Gennaro. We sat on the floor. I pulled up a bench and put my writing pad on it. I was not tired, and I wanted to write, but I could not do it. I could not write at all. What did the Nahual tell you about the allies? I asked. My question seemed to catch her off guard. She did not know how to answer. I can't think, she finally said. It was as though she had never experienced that state before. She paced back and forth in front of me. Tiny beads of perspiration had formed on the tip of her nose and on her upper lip. She suddenly grabbed me by the hand and practically pulled me out of the house. She led me to a nearby ravine, and there she got sick. My stomach felt queasy. She said that the pull of the allies had been too great and that I should force myself to throw up. I stared at her, waiting for a further explanation. She took my head in her hands and stuck her finger down my throat with the certainty of a nurse dealing with a child, and actually made me vomit. She explained that human beings had a very delicate glow around the stomach, and that glow was always being pulled by everything around. At times, when the pull was too great, as in the case of contact with the allies, or even in the case of contact with strong people, the glow would become agitated, change color, or even fade altogether. In such instances, the only thing one could do was simply to throw up. I felt better, but not quite myself yet. I had a sense of tiredness, of heaviness around my eyes. We walked back to the house. As we reached the door, La Gorda sniffed the air like a dog and said that she knew which allies were mine. Her statement, which ordinarily would have had no other significance than the one she alluded to, or the one I myself read into it, had the special quality of a cathartic device. It made me explode into thoughts. All at once, my usual intellectual deliberations came into being. I felt myself leaping in the air, as if thoughts had an energy of their own. The first thought that came to my mind was that the allies were actual entities, as I had suspected without ever daring to admit it, even to myself. I had seen them and felt them and communicated with them. I was euphoric. I embraced La Gorda and began to explain to her the crux of my intellectual dilemma. I had seen the allies without the aid of Don Juan or Don Gennaro, and that act made all the difference in the world to me. I told La Gorda that once when I had reported to Don Juan that I had seen one of the allies, he had laughed and urged me not to take myself so seriously and to disregard what I had seen. I had never wanted to believe I was having hallucinations, but I did not want to accept that there were allies either. My rational background was unbending. I could not bridge the gap. This time, however, everything was different, and the thought that there were actually beings on this earth that were from another world without being aliens to the earth was more than I could bear. I said to La Gorda, half in jest, that secretly I would have given anything to be crazy. That would have absolved some part of me from the crushing responsibility of revamping my understanding of the world. The irony of it was that I could not have been more willing to revamp my understanding of the world, on an intellectual level, that is. But that was not enough. That had never been enough. And that had been my insurmountable obstacle all along, my deadly flaw. I had been willing to dally in Don Juan's world in a semi-convinced fashion. Therefore, I had been a quasi-sorcerer. All my efforts had been no more than my inane eagerness to fence with the intellect, as if I were in academia, where one could do that very thing from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., at which time, duly tired, one goes home. Don Juan used to say as a joke that after arranging the world in a most beautiful and enlightened manner, the scholar goes home at 5 o'clock in order to forget his beautiful arrangement. While La Gorda made us some food, I worked feverishly on my notes. I felt much more relaxed after eating. La Gorda was in the best of spirits. She clowned, the way Don Gennaro used to, imitating the gestures I made while I wrote. "What do you know about the allies, Gorda?" I asked. "Only what the Nahual told me," she replied. He said that the allies were forces that a sorcerer learns to control. He had two inside his gourd, and so did Gennaro. How did they keep them inside their gourds? No one knows that. All the Nahual knew was that a tiny, perfect gourd with a neck must be found before one could harness the allies. Where can one find that kind of gourd? Anywhere. The Nahual left word with me, in case we survived the attack of the allies, that we should start looking for the perfect gourd, which must be the size of the thumb of the left hand. That was the size of the Nahual's gourd. Have you seen his gourd? No, never. The Nawal said that a gourd of that kind is not in the world of men. It's like a little bundle that one can distinguish hanging from their belts. But if you deliberately look at it, you will see nothing. The gourd, once it is found, must be groomed with great care. Usually sorcerers find gourds like that on vines in the woods. They pick them and dry them, and then they hollow them out. And then they smooth them and polish them. Once the sorcerer has his gourd, he must offer it to the allies and entice them to live there. If the allies consent, the gourd disappears from the world of men, and the allies become an aid to the sorcerer. The Nawal and Gennaro could make their allies do anything that needed to be done, things they themselves could not do, such as, for instance, sending the wind to chase me, or sending that chicken to run inside Lydia's blouse. I heard a peculiar, prolonged hissing sound outside the door. It was the exact sound I had heard in Doña Soledad's house 2 days before. This time I knew it was the jaguar. The sound did not scare me. In fact, I would have stepped out to see the jaguar had La Gorda not stopped me. "You're still incomplete," she said. "The allies would feast on you if you go out by yourself, especially that daring one that's prowling out there now." "My body feels very safe," I protested. She patted my back and held me down against the bench on which I was writing. "You're not a complete sorcerer yet," she said. "You have a huge patch in your middle, and the force of those allies would yank it out of place. They are no joke." "What are you supposed to do when an ally comes to you in this fashion?" "I don't bother with them one way or another. The Nawal taught me to be balanced and not to seek anything eagerly. Tonight, for instance, I knew which allies would go to you, if you can ever get a gourd and groom it. You may be eager to get them. I'm not. Chances are I'll never get them myself. They are a pain in the neck." "Why?" "Because they are forces, and as such, they can drain you to nothing." The Nawal said that one is better off with nothing except one's purpose and freedom. Someday, when you're complete, perhaps we'll have to choose whether or not to keep them. I told her that I personally liked the jaguar, even though there was something overbearing about it. She peered at me. There was a look of surprise and bewilderment in her eyes. "I really like that one," I said. "Tell me what you saw," she said. I realized at that moment that I had automatically assumed that she had seen the same things I had. I described in great detail the 4 allies I had seen as I had seen them. She listened more than attentively. She appeared to be spellbound by my description. "The allies have no form," she said when I had finished. "They are like a presence, like a wind, like a glow. The first one we found tonight was a blackness that wanted to get inside my body. That's why I screamed. I felt it reaching up my legs. The others were just colors. Their glow was so strong, though, that it made the trail look as if it were daytime. Her statements astounded me. I had finally accepted, after years of struggle and purely on the basis of our encounter with them that night, that the allies had a consensual form, a substance which could be perceived equally by everyone's senses. I jokingly told La Gorda that I had already written in my notes that they were creatures with form. "What am I going to do now?" I asked in a rhetorical sense. "It's very simple," she said. "Write that they are not." I thought that she was absolutely right. "Why do I see them as monsters?" I asked. "That's no mystery," she said. "You haven't lost your human form yet. The same thing happened to me. I used to see the allies as people. All of them were Indian men with horrible faces and mean looks. They used to wait for me in deserted places. I thought that they were after me as a woman. The Nawal used to laugh his head off at my fears. But still, I was half dead with fright. One of them used to come and sit on my bed and shake it until I would wake up. The fright that ally used to give me was something that I don't want repeated, even now that I'm changed. Tonight, I think I was as afraid of the allies as I used to be." "You mean that you don't see them as human beings anymore?" "No, not anymore. The Nawal told you that an ally is formless. He is right. An ally is only a presence, a helper that is nothing, and yet it is as real as you and me." "Have the little sisters seen the allies?" "Everybody has seen them one time or another." "Are the allies just a force for them too?" "No, they are like you. They haven't lost their human form yet. None of them has. For all of them, the little sisters, the Gennaros, and Soledad, the allies are horrendous things. With them, the allies are malevolent, dreadful creatures of the night. The sole mention of the allies sends Lydia and Josefina and Pablito into a frenzy. Rosa and Nestor are not that afraid of them, but they don't want to have anything to do with them either. Benigno has his own designs, so he's not concerned with them. They don't bother him or me, for that matter. But the others are easy prey for the allies, especially now that the allies are out of the Nawal's and Gennaro's gourds. They come all the time looking for you. The Nawal told me that as long as one clings to the human form, one can only reflect that form. And since the allies feed directly onto our life force in the middle of the stomach, they usually make us sick, and then we see them as heavy, ugly creatures. Is there something that we can do to protect ourselves or to change the shape of those creatures? What all of you have to do is lose your human forms. What do you mean? My question did not seem to have any meaning for her. She stared at me blankly, as if waiting for me to clarify what I had just said. She closed her eyes for a moment. "You don't know about the human mold and the human form, do you?" she asked. I stared at her. "I've just seen that you know nothing about them," she said, and smiled. "You are absolutely right," I said. "The Nawal told me that the human form is a force," she said. "And the human mold is, well, a mold. He said that everything has a particular mold. Plants have molds, animals have molds, worms have molds. Are you sure the Nawal never showed you the human mold?" I told her that he had sketched the concept, but in a very brief manner, once when he had tried to explain something about a dream I had had. In the dream in question, I had seen a man who seemed to be concealing himself in the darkness of a narrow gully. To find him there scared me. I looked at him for a moment, and then the man stepped forward and made himself visible to me. He was naked, and his body glowed. He seemed to be delicate, almost frail. I liked his eyes. They were friendly and profound. I thought that they were very kind. But then he stepped back into the darkness of the gully, and his eyes became like two mirrors, like the eyes of a ferocious animal. Don Juan said that I had encountered the human mold in dreaming. He explained that sorcerers have the avenue of their dreaming to lead them to the mold, and that the mold of men was definitely an entity which could be seen by some of us at certain times when we are imbued with power, and by all of us for sure at the moment of our death. He described the mold as being the source, the origin of man, since without the mold to group together the forces of life, there was no way for that force to assemble itself into the shape of man. He interpreted my dream as a brief and extraordinarily simplistic glance at the mold. He said that my dream had restated the fact that I was a simple-minded and very earthy man. La Gorda laughed and said that she would have said the same thing herself. To see the mold as an average naked man and then as an animal had been indeed a very simplistic view of the mold. "Perhaps it was just a stupid ordinary dream," I said, trying to defend myself. "No," she said with a large grin. "You see, the human mold glows, and it is always found in water holes and narrow gullies." "Why in gullies and water holes?" I asked. "It feeds on water. Without water, there is no mold," she replied. "I know that the Nawal took you to water holes regularly in hopes of showing you the mold. But your emptiness prevented you from seeing anything. The same thing happened to me. He used to make me lie naked on a rock in the very center of a particular dried up water hole. But all I did was to feel the presence of something that scared me out of my wits." "Why does emptiness prevent one from seeing the mold?" The Nawal said that everything in the world is a force, a pull, or a push. In order for us to be pushed or pulled, we need to be like a sail, like a kite in the wind. But if we have a hole in the middle of our luminosity, the force goes through it and never acts upon us. The Nahual told me that Gennaro liked you very much and tried to make you aware of the hole in your middle. He used to fly his sombrero as a kite to tease you. He even pulled you from that hole until you had diarrhea. But you never caught on to what he was doing. Why didn't they tell me as plainly as you have told me? They did, but you didn't notice their words. I found her statement impossible to believe. To accept that they had told me about it and I had not acknowledged it was unthinkable. Did you ever see the mold, Gorda? I asked. Sure, when I became complete again. I went to that particular waterhole one day by myself, and there it was. It was a radiant, luminous being. I could not look at it. It blinded me. But being in its presence was enough. I felt happy and strong, and nothing else mattered. Nothing. Just being there was all I wanted. The Nahual said that sometimes if we have enough personal power, we can catch a glimpse of the mold, even though we are not sorcerers. When that happens, we say that we have seen God. He said that if we call it God, it is the truth. The mold is God. I had a dreadful time understanding the Nahual because I was a very religious woman. I had nothing else in the world but my religion. So to hear the Nahual say the things he used to say made me shiver. But then I became complete, and the forces of the world began to pull me. And I knew that the Nahual was right. The mold is God. What do you think? The day I see it, I'll tell you, Gorda, I said. She laughed and said that the Nahual used to make fun of me, saying that the day I would see the mold, I would probably become a Franciscan friar, because in the depths of me, I was a religious soul. Was the mold you saw a man or a woman? I asked. Neither. It was simply a luminous human. The Nahual said that I could have asked something for myself, that a warrior cannot let that chance pass. But I could not think of anything to ask for. It was better that way. I have the most beautiful memory of it. The Nahual said that a warrior with enough power can see the mold many, many times. What a great fortune that must be. But if the human mold is what puts us together, what is the human form? Something sticky, a sticky force that makes us the people we are. The Nahual told me that the human form has no form. Like the allies that he carried in his gourd, it's anything, but in spite of not having form, it possesses us during our lives and doesn't leave us until we die. I've never seen the human form, but I have felt it in my body. She then described a very complex series of sensations that she had had over a period of years that culminated in a serious illness, the climax of which was a bodily state that reminded me of descriptions I had read of a massive heart attack. She said that the human form, as the force that it is, left her body after a serious internal battle that manifested itself as illness. "It sounds as if you had a heart attack," I said. "Maybe I did," she replied. "But one thing I know for sure. The day I had it, I lost my human form. I became so weak that for days I couldn't even get out of my bed. Since that day, I haven't had the energy to be my old self. From time to time, I have tried to get into my old habits, but I didn't have the strength to enjoy them the way I used to. Finally, I gave up trying." "What is the point of losing your form?" "A warrior must drop the human form in order to change, to really change. Otherwise, there is only talk about change, like in your case. The Nawal said that it is useless to think or hope that one can change one's habits. One cannot change one iota as long as one holds on to the human form. The Nawal told me that a warrior knows that he cannot change, and yet he makes it his business to try to change, even though he knows that he won't be able to. That's the only advantage a warrior has over the average man. The warrior is never disappointed when he fails to change." "But you are still yourself, Gorda, aren't you?" "No, not anymore. The only thing that makes you think you are yourself is the form. Once it leaves, you are nothing. But you still talk and think and feel, as you always did, don't you?" "Not at all. I'm new." She laughed and hugged me as if she were consoling a child. "Only Eligio and I have lost our form," she went on. "It was our great fortune that we lost it while the Nawal was among us. You people will have a horrid time. That is your fate. Whoever loses it next will have only me as a companion. I already feel sorry for whoever it will be." "What else did you feel, Gorda, when you lost your form, besides not having enough energy?" "The Nawal told me that a warrior without form begins to see an eye. I saw an eye in front of me every time I closed my eyes. It got so bad that I couldn't rest anymore. The eye followed me wherever I went. I nearly went mad. Finally, I suppose, I became used to it. Now I don't even notice it because it has become part of me. The formless warrior uses that eye to start dreaming. If you don't have a form, you don't have to go to sleep to do dreaming. The eye in front of you pulls you every time you want to go." "Where exactly is that eye, Gorda?" She closed her eyes and moved her hand from side to side, right in front of her eyes, covering the span of her face. "Sometimes the eye is very small, and other times it is enormous," she went on. "When it's small, your dreaming is precise. If it's big, your dreaming is like flying over the mountains and not really seeing much. I haven't done enough dreaming yet, but the Nawal told me that that eye is my trump card. One day, when I become truly formless, I won't see the I anymore. The I will become just like me, nothing. And yet, it'll be there, like the allies. The Nawal said that everything has to be sifted through our human form. When we have no form, then nothing has form, and yet everything is present. I couldn't understand what she meant by that, but now I see that he was absolutely right. The allies are only a presence, and so will be the I. But at this time, that I is everything to me. In fact, in having that I should need nothing else in order to call up my dreaming, even when I'm awake. I haven't been able to do that yet. Perhaps I'm like you, a bit stubborn and lazy. How did you do the flying you showed me tonight? The Nawal taught me how to use my body to make lights, because we are light anyway. So I make sparks and lights, and they in turn lure the lines of the world. Once I see one, it's easy to hook myself to it. How do you hook yourself? I grab it. She made a gesture with her hands. She clawed them and then placed them together, joined at the wrists, forming a sort of bowl with the clawed fingers upright. You have to grab the line like a jaguar, she went on, and never separate the wrists. If you do, you'll fall down and break your neck. She paused, and that forced me to look at her, waiting for more of her revelations. You don't believe me, do you? She asked. Without giving me time to answer, she squatted and began again to produce her display of sparks. I was calm and collected and could place my undivided attention on her actions. When she snapped her fingers open, every fiber of her muscles seemed to tense at once. That tension seemed to be focused on the very tips of her fingers and was projected out like rays of light. The moisture in her fingertips was actually a vehicle to carry some sort of energy emanating from her body. How did you do that, Gorda? I asked, truly marveling at her. I really don't know, she said. I simply do it. I've done it lots and lots of times, and yet I don't know how I do it. When I grab one of those rays, I feel that I'm being pulled by something. I really don't do anything else except let the lines I've grabbed pull me. When I want to get back through, I feel that the line doesn't want to let me free, and I get frantic. The Nawal said that was my worst feature. I get so frightened that one of these days I'm going to injure my body. But I figure that one of these days I'll be even more formless, and then I won't get frightened. So as long as I hold on until that day, I'm all right. Tell me then, Gorda, how do you let the lines pull you? We're back again in the same spot. I don't know. The Nawal warned me about you. You want to know things that cannot be known. I struggled to make clear to her that what I was after were the procedures. I had really given up looking for an explanation from all of them, because their explanations explained nothing to me. To describe to me the steps that were followed was something altogether different. How did you learn to let your body hold on to the lines of the world? I asked. I learned that in dreaming, she said, but I really don't know how. Everything for a woman warrior starts in dreaming. The Nawal told me, just as he told you, first to look for my hands in my dreams. I couldn't find them at all. In my dreams, I had no hands. I tried and tried for years to find them. Every night, I used to give myself the command to find my hands, but it was to no avail. I never found anything in my dreams. The Nawal was merciless with me. He said that I had to find them or perish. So I lied to him that I had found my hands in my dreams. The Nawal didn't say a word, but Gennaro threw his hat on the floor and danced on it. He patted my head and said that I was really a great warrior. The more he praised me, the worse I felt. I was about to tell the Nawal that the truth when crazy Gennaro aimed his behind at me and let out the loudest and longest fart I had ever heard. He actually pushed me backward with it. It was like a hot, foul wind, disgusting and smelly, just like me. The Nawal was choking with laughter. I ran to the house and hid there. I was very fat then. I used to eat a great deal, and I had a lot of gas. So I decided not to eat for a while. Lydia and Josefina helped me. I didn't eat anything for 23 days, and then one night I found my hands in my dreams. They were old and ugly and green, but they were mine. So that was the beginning. The rest was easy.